Round number 9 of the Candidates Tournament 2016. Today I'm going to take a look at the encounter Viswanathan Anand against Levon Aronian, and this was a crucial game. Could be a crucial game if people look back at the end of the Candidates. Who knows at this point? So let me take you through it. Anand started out with e4 and Aronian with the black piece replied e5, and Anand is going for the Italian game, which is not seen as often on the top level. Usually everybody goes for the Roy Lopez, bishop b5, but bishop c4 can in fact lead to quite similar positions, I think. So Anand also chooses a quiet route here, goes castle, and not any crazy stuff like Evans Gambit or c3 d4, just castle, and play a quiet Italian game, a lot of maneuvering, and he's not really trying to claim any opening advantage here. He's not going for long theoretical discussions, but just is trying to get a game. So Carlsen style, kind of. d6, d3, knight f6, c3. Now a6, a common and useful move to give this bishop some space here back on a7. Now a4, and this is, to me at least, a little bit unusual. Usually white plays bishop b3 and then the typical maneuvering stuff, knight bd2, rook e1, knight f1, and so on, h3, and it's a kind of typical Italian game. But Anand was aware of this kind of new idea to play a4 and follow up with, as we'll see in the game right now, knight a3 and get the knight to e3 in this way via c2, which is unusual because if we compare this position with a lot of the Roy Lopez positions, usually the bishop is on c2, and this kind of maneuver is difficult to accomplish. But here it's possible and quite interesting because at the same time also white is grabbing some space on the queen side and doesn't have to move the rook yet on f1. Knight e7, black is also playing a very popular and typical maneuver here, also maneuvering the knight to g6 to open up the queen side and having ideas, following with c6, d5, and the knight is well placed on g6, protecting e5 in case black plays d5, and also sometimes can come to f4 and create some trouble there. Bishop e3. Now white wants to exchange the bishops first before he puts the knight on e3, and it makes a lot of sense because this bishop could be annoying in the long run. So castle, bishop takes a7, black decided to let white take on a7, and the rook of course is misplaced for now, but black will just take one move to get the rook back into a game by playing rook a8. Now knight e3, and here Aronian goes knight g4, which is quite possible. I was also looking at other moves such as b6 here, or maybe c6 as well, with this idea to play in the center with d5. Say a5, d5, takes, and bishop b3, and it's a whole different story obviously if black occupies the center in this way. So knight g4 aims to exchange the strong knight on e3, queen d2, and now a5. And a5 I don't like as much. a5, the principal idea behind this move is to fix the pawn structure on the queen side and put a pawn on a dark square, as opposed to maybe the pawn being fixed itself on a light square if black played another move. And the whole positional idea behind this is that you want to keep, in most cases, your pawns on the opposite color of your bishop if you only have one bishop left. In this case, black has one bishop left, a light squared bishop, so black wants to keep the pawns on the dark squares. But a5 at the same time also creates some weaknesses and makes the black queen side less flexible. So for example, the b5 square now is available again for the bishop. And also it loses some time. The question is if black could have done something better here. So maybe just exchange this knight on e3, return with the rook, and first do more important things, maybe such as develop this bishop on c8. And well, maybe Aronian didn't like this a5, anything along these lines, but it's not that terrible for black. So I think that instead of a5, black could have proceeded in a different manner. That being said, a5 is not like a huge mistake in any way. Maybe I'm even wrong to call it an inaccuracy, but just feels to me that in the course of the game, now white is getting an advantage here and is having the easier play as well. Now d4, white goes for d4 finally, and now rook a8. The rook returns to its natural square, and now d takes e5, and here black takes back with the knight on g4. D takes e5 would run into queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and knight g5, hitting the f7 pawn, which black would need to defend with rook f8, and then there's knight d5. White is definitely seizing the initiative here and is having some chances. But after knight takes e5, knight takes e5, here maybe d takes e5 was more so possible. Even though it also looks a little bit unpleasant for black after rook a1, and now black has to move the queen, because after queen exchange, the bishop on c8 is kind of a problem child, because there's no good square available for it. And you don't want to exchange it on e6, because then white could invade on the 7th rank immediately. So that would be a little bit unpleasant. But instead black could play queen g5, and it's also not easy for white to enter, obviously, because at the same time bishop is covering this entry square on d7. And this could be possible, but also looks more comfortable, probably better for white. So instead Aronian took with the knight, which is to me a concession, because white now has the space advantage, has the center on e4, and this gives him a little edge. Bishop b3, of course white likes to keep the bishop here. Now knight d7, I'm not sure about knight d7. Maybe bishop e6, I just want to develop this bishop really. Here it looks like bishop d5 might be a good choice for white. If now black plays c6, then white exchanges and has this target here on d6. And probably black should exchange. White is still better in all these variations really, but it's not that much, and the black position also appears solid. Knight d7, and here Anand prophylactically moved his bishop out of the way by playing bishop c2. Instead, grabbing some more space could have been quite a good choice here with f4. And now rook e8 and centralizing the queen, queen to d4. Queen f6 now doesn't really work because of e5, which is quite strong, and there's some threats along the f-file if black decide to take, which he shouldn't. And if black plays knight c5, now only white plays the bishop back to c2. And if knight e6, then queen back, and white has gained some more space and sometimes even has ideas to play f5, f6. And it becomes more and more unpleasant, and the whole time really this bishop on c8 is kind of looking without a perspective, and we see how nicely the knight is placed here, taking away squares, as well as always having the option to maybe go to d5. Alright, let's return to the game. Anand played bishop c2, rook e8, and now he took a completely different approach to this position, just keeping everything solid, stable, protecting pawn e4 one more time, and maybe looking forward to expand on the queen side. b6, rook fd1, now knight c5. Yeah, this knight c5 would now follow also. I'm not sure if this was the best course for black. Maybe simply bishop b7 here developed a bishop, but in all these positions it's always white who's just slightly better with the space advantage. So it's always a little bit more comfortable for white. But here, this provoking of b4 didn't seem to make a lot of sense. Now black just returns to d7, and it seemed to me that white wanted to play b4 at some point anyway, so okay. Bishop b3. Okay, now there's some threat. Queen d5, double attacks, so black has to react to this threat. Knight f6. Now queen d4. Beautiful square for the queen. In general, centralized queen is always good. Well, no, not always good, but is good if it cannot be attacked or driven away from the central square, and the queen on d4 is quite safe here. And now queen e7, and Anand after a game said this was maybe a mistake because it brings black into an uncomfortable situation. Instead, bishop e6. Once again, I'm proposing this move, just exchanging the bishops for now. Bishop takes e6, rook takes e6. And still, this is better for white. White has more space, can now once again fix the pawn structure here on the queen side, can maybe play knight f5, many options, but at the same time, black also has defensive resource, and the fight is not over by any means, of course. But after queen e7, it gets a little bit more uncomfortable for black. After knight d5, forcing the knight exchange, and now bishop takes d5, and forcing the rook to move. And the rook has to go back to a7 where it came from, because after rook b8, this is the problem here. Black would like to play rook b8, but now there's b takes a5, b takes a5 and queen a7, hitting both the pawn and the rook. And white picks up a pawn, and if black decides to play c5 here, then I could imagine that this pawn on d6 becomes a target after, let's say, queen d2, b takes a5, and something like moving the bishop in. Also, black has some problems here. So Aronian goes rook a7, and now Anand fixes the pawn structure b5, and this bishop is quite strong on d5 and cannot be removed in any way for black except for exchanging it with his own bishop, and this is what he does. Bishop b7, but now c4, and whenever black is now going to take on d5, white is going to recapture the c pawn, opening up the c file and having another target on c7, and the whole queen side will be fixed, and black will have a hard time to create any passed pawns in any arising endgames later on. This is exactly what we'll see. So queen e5, Aronian chooses to exchange queens here because he probably thinks it alleviates his defending task, but still, it's not easy. Here Anand goes for f4, which is a committing move because in the long run it weakens this pawn on e4, and white will always need to protect it. It's not clear to me what the best plan is, and f4 worked fine for Anand in the game. Alternatively, white could have thought about advancing these pawns, and not sure of the g pawn yet, because maybe white would have a plan like rook h1, rook h3, rook g3, kind of similar to the game, but keeping the pawn on e4 protected. This was just another alternative. So f4, f6, rook c3, bring the rook over to ask some questions here on the king side. King d7, rook h3 to provoke h6 and to create a square on g6 for the rook to chill. Now Aronian finally chooses to take on d5, which he kind of has to, because otherwise he cannot move the rook, obviously, because the rook is defending the bishop. So bishop takes d5, c takes d5, and rook a8. King f3, rook a8, and king g4. And I think this is one of the critical moments in the game, definitely. After the game, Anand said he was kind of bluffing, or, well, maybe not bluffing, but hoping that Aronian, who was, I believe, short in time, would just take on e4 here and not go for the passive defense. But it seems that black should just hold here like it is and just move around. King c8, and of course this looks very strong for white. But at the same time, the rook is kind of defending his pawn on e4, and it's not clear how white will make progress. So I just played around and tried to see what's going to happen here. The computer also suggests h5, h4 maybe, but okay, I don't think that's necessary. And it's not clear what white is going to do, because once, let's say, once we play something like rook c4, king b7, rook c3, okay, black's not going to take now on e4 because of rook takes g7, but once this rook moves over, then black's probably more willing to take on e4 and grab this one as well. Or maybe play, I don't know. And black also has a passed pawn on. This is important if black also gets the a pawn rolling, and this is quite different than what we'll see in the game. And yeah, it's not clear to me. I mean, it could be that somehow with some plan white is winning, but definitely black has better chances here, or better hopes. And also white can go wrong if, for example, if white wants to go something like g4 and somehow play h4 g5, and then that would be terrible because of rook f7 stopping any g5. And if there's actually a cute variation here I want to show you, if white just chills around, then the black king is coming, and then there's rook e5, which is kind of nice. And there's the checkmate here. Suddenly, king is trapped. So, let's return to see what actually happened in the game. So Aronian took. Now rook takes g7. And here he made the decisive mistake, I believe, which is really difficult to find. Aronian had to play king to d8, and the idea behind it is, yeah, just amazing, or at least to me it's amazing, and difficult to find. If white plays like in the game rook d2, rook takes a4, rook c2, now black has this defensive move rook e5, and this is quite difficult to spot, I believe, in advance. The point being that after rook c takes c7, that would be horrible for black if the rooks stayed on the 7th rank together, but black can now exchange one rook by playing rook g5. And once black exchanges one rook, it's not as bad anymore. Black will go on rook d4, and this is a draw. This is what black had to find. There's another move here in this position which goes like f5, but this remains tricky and not clear. What still, it would have been much better and what happened in the game. If now the king moves somewhere, then now black can play rook e7 and put the king on f6. Well, actually, I'm not sure about this. After rook d7 still looks pretty horrible. But there was some point to it, which I do not know now. Anyways, if white takes on f5, then black can also initiate some counterplay here, but remains tricky. White king hides behind the black pawn here on h7, and who knows? Who knows? In all these endgames, it's always white who has the practical chance, and always black who has to find great defensive resource, just like we saw in these variations. So Aronian goes for king c8. Now rook d2. White keeps the rooks on the board, creates this threat of rook c2, which black cannot allow. So king b8. And maybe here rook d8, but again, I wouldn't be surprised if with lengthy analysis this also turns out to be losing. It at least keeps the king a little bit closer, because with king b8 you move your king one square farther away from the king side. So this is also not optimal, of course. But yeah, here's something like rook c2, maybe rook d7. Yeah, all these variations, it's always white having the connected passed pawn somehow here, and black just having one passed pawn, and it seems white has always the very good chances. Okay, king b8, rook c2, rook c8, defending the pawn on c7, and now white just defends the pawn on a4. Doesn't want to give this one up because the a pawn would be quite quick and would create counterplay. So instead black grabs the d5 pawn, but of course the pawn d6 is farther away, and also in the process white wins the pawn on f6. Here rook f8 was another move, but g3, simply rook takes c5, king e6. It's just the main problem for black is here the king. If we compare both kings, right? The white king so active and taking pawns and playing, and the black king not participating anyway. So that's the main problem. Rook c5 and rook f7, white will also pick up the pawn, and it will be kind of similar to what we'll see in the game, I guess. So rook takes d5, king f6, rook f8 check, and now white simply exchanges rooks and gives up the pawn f4. And this works out very well. Takes, rook f5 check, king g6, rook takes f4. Now be precise, don't take the pawn yet, because of rook h4 picking up the h2 pawn, and black's actually better. So g3, first attacking the rook moves, and now king takes h6. d5. Now Anand plays king h5. Afterwards he said that was kind of ridiculous that he didn't play king g5. It didn't matter. Both moves are winning. King g5 makes more sense to get this pawn running, which is farther away from the black king. So in case you have to make a choice, then get this one running instead the one that's far away. So king h5, d4, g4, d3, h4. Rook d4, okay, d2 shouldn't be allowed, so white is blocking this pawn now. Now the king is coming, but it just takes way too long and everything. Now white can give up a pawn with king g6, and that's important to give up the passed pawn here, to exchange the pawn against this one. And white keeps this advanced g pawn, and this is enough to win, because black is just too slow to create any counterplay. And this is where I was getting it earlier when I said that the pawn structure fixed here on the queen side can make a big difference, because black is so slow to develop any counterplay. King e8, rook a3 once again, the rook just defending the pawn, preparing king g7 simply, just trying to advance. Here if black plays king f8, now white can go rook c3, rook takes a4, rook takes c7, and after rook b4 just rook b7, and black cannot take, well, can take the pawn on b5, but then there's king f6 threatening checkmate, and then this one is just running, and black is in no way fast enough to get counterplay. So Aronian tried rook c4, now king g7, king d7, just moving up the pawn, c6, and now king f6, the king retreats to open up for the pawn, c takes b5, g7, rook g4, and now white simply takes back. Black has a passed pawn, but too far behind, the king also not active enough. Rook g1, and now Anand just builds a bridge, rook e5, now the bridge is coming, rook to g5 is the threat, nothing black can do, a4 of course is way too slow, and Actually, just one move too slow, but this is still too slow. So instead he took on g7, and last precise move here, which wasn't necessary, but still, if you can be precise, then be it. Then be. Rook d5 check, and Aronian resigned because after the king move, white just takes on g7. The king cannot even come into action. All the black can do is send this lonely guy on the a file, but white will just chill. White can do whatever white wants here and just stop this pawn, pick it up, and that's it. Okay, so Aronian resigned, and this was obviously a very important victory for Anand, which puts him in shared first place, I should say, with Karyakin on, let me think, 5.5 out of 9, and puts Aronian back in shared third place with 5 out of 9. And just like in 2014, the candidates tournament, the last candidates tournament, Anand wins a really important game and a really convincing endgame as well. Back then, it was the very first round of the tournament where Anand also won an endgame in a convincing manner. Today, similarly, nice endgame technique, built up his advantage, and then Aronian, well, cracked. I'm not sure if he cracked, but it seems to me that this Krill Kamon was really rook takes e4. Afterwards there was this miraculous defense still with king d8 and rook e5, but this is quite difficult to find. So it's getting hotter, getting to the end of the tournament, and who knows who's going to win. Anand and Karyakin now in shared first place. I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.